There are a lot of weapons and spells from the base game that have been indirectly buffed because of this DLC, whether it be because of things like talismans, crystal tiers, or armor sets. A lot of these things are just now a lot better. So for today, we're just going to go over the top 5 most improved builds from the base game. Now, normally when I make these lists, I like to add a lot of variety onto them, but unfortunately, there is not going to be a single intelligence build on this list. From Software just completely shafted intelligence builds for this DLC. They catered a lot more to all of the other damage stats. There's hardly any good pure intelligence options for the DLC, and there's hardly anything that boosted pure intelligence for the base game too. I did my best to try and make a pure intelligence type of build for this video, but like there was nothing really worth talking about. So unfortunately, if you did want to look for an intelligence build, this is not going to be the video. The Blasphemous Blade is still the best weapon in the entire game. Yes, even after the nerfs to stance damage and its knockback potential, it's still just gotten a lot better in this DLC because of a couple of items. Now, this build is going to be broken. It is not meant to be fun, and I am going to pair this build alongside some poison buffs that I will get into, but these poison buffs are not specific to this build at all. You can actually use these for any single type of build, and they actually will help you melt bosses a lot faster. But I did just decide to throw this strat into this build because I'm already talking about some broken stuff, so I might as well talk about some broken buffs too. Now, the reason why the Blasphemous Blade is a lot better in this DLC is because of 2 items, the Talisman of the Dread and the Blood-Sucking Cracked Tier. Now, the Talisman of the Dread is going to be 15% more damage to the skill, and this will stack with the Shard of Alexander. And with the Fire Scorpion Charm, this actually is going to make you take more damage, but we will have health regen from the Blasphemous Blade, and we're going to use some health-based spells. And as for the Crystal Tiers, we're going to have the Fire-based tier, which is 15% more damage, and the Blood-Sucking Cracked tier, which is 20% more damage, and all these things are going to stack together and just make it just output so much damage. Now, yes, the Blood-Sucking Cracked tier is going to make you lose a decent amount of health. It's like roughly 1% per second. But the Blasphemous health regen is just stupid, and you can put on the Blessings of the Erdtree because you do have a faith-based build, and all these like health penalties and health draining effects can just be completely negated. Now, for this build, we're going to have 60 Vigor, about 30 Strength, and just 60 Faith, because with this 60 Faith, it's just going to help enhance the damage of the weapon skill a whole bunch more, and we can use some spells. Obviously, Golden Vow, Flame grant me Strength for more damage and damage negation. Gonna have Blessings of the Erdtree to just help negate the effect of the Blood-Sucking tier. You can use things like Ancient Dagger's Lightning Strike or Pest Thread Spears for those larger types of bosses, albeit it's not that necessary because Blasphemous Blade is probably still going to destroy them. Unless you are going up against a boss that's like 80% resist to fire, then you can use these instead. We also do have Scarlet Aeonia, which this spell like basically procs Rot instantly, and it's going to be like 30% damage over the next 90 seconds. And proccing Scarlet Rot on an enemy or a nearby enemy will actually help proc the buffs of the Kindred of Rot Exaltation, Mushroom Crown, and Poison Hand. We're going to be using all these 3 things, because when you're proccing Rot or Poison to yourself or a nearby enemy, you just gain a lot of damage for the next 20 seconds. Now, the strat I was talking about earlier is going to be with the Deadly Poison Perfume Bottle. The good thing about this skill is that you don't even need the requirements to use it, and it will just summon this big deadly poison cloud that's going to instantly proc poison on yourself and nearby enemies. And being that it's going to proc poison on ourselves, we're just going to instantly gain the boost from all of these other buffs. Now, you can use a neutralizing bolus to remove the poison, or you can just let it wear off by itself. It's only going to last 30 seconds, and you're going to get a bunch of health regen from the Blasphemous Blade anyway. Now, once again, it's not necessary for this build at all, but if you did want to make this broken build even more broken, this is what you can do. And also, you can just throw on the Rakshasa armor set. Every single piece is going to just add 2% more damage. It's not going to be the best armor set in terms of damage negation, but it's still going to be better than like some lighter armor in the game. Zamor Ice Storm of the Zamor Curvesword and the Stormblade Ash of War have gotten a lot better in this DLC because of the In-Range Divine Beast Talisman. This actually does boost the damage of these skills by an additional 10%, and yes, this will stack with the Shard of Alexander as we do have on in this gameplay, and it just makes these S-tier weapon skills just even better. Now, you can also throw on the Divine Beast Helm, and this actually will further enhance the damage of these storm-based skills by about 5%, but it will decrease your healing effect by 10 to 12% depending on which helmet that you do have equipped. And if you are going through the DLC of which of these enemies are hitting super hard, it is just not worth that little bit of more damage. So I'd much rather just have something different on, like the Rakshasa helmet. This is just going to be 2% damage to all different types of attacks. You will take like the slightest bit more damage than usual, but it's not that noticeable. In fact, you can have the entire armor set on for 2% more damage per piece. It's not necessary to the build, but it does help. But specifically for this build, we are going to be power stancing curved greatswords. Obviously, there's a more curved sword, and we are going to have the dismounter in the offhand with Stormblade. Now, this is going to require us to go into a quality type of build, because both weapons do typically have that quality type of scaling. You can go into dexterity mainly as well, and you'll benefit perfectly fine, because as a more curved sword does get a better dexterity scaling. Now, unfortunately, for the skill as a more Ice Storm, it actually doesn't scale off anything. It just scales off weapon level. so going into a particular stat is not going to help boost the damage, but this skill is still incredible because it procs frost so quickly, like upwards of like 500 frost buildup in just one attack for only 15 FP, and it does 40 stance damage. It is just an amazing skill to use. But unfortunately, it's on a very mediocre weapon because the light attack combos of the Zamor Curse Sword are just not good. The weapon has really bad range, and the moveset does not do it any favors. So what we're going to be doing is power stancing it, because at least the power stancing curved greatsword combo is not too bad, and it can help proc the multi-hit talismans. So we're going to have the Millicent Prosthesis, which is going to result in more damage, and +5 to dexterity. Now we do have Stormblade equipped onto the dismounter. Now, the Stormblade Ash War does scale either off strength or dexterity, so it doesn't really matter which one that you actually spec into. But Stormblade is an incredibly cheap skill that can do amazing damage, and now with the Enraged Divine Beast Talisman, it's going to be doing even more damage. And this is going to be a nice projectile option. If enemies just go further away from you, or you're trying to just pick off enemies at a distance, you can just switch to the Dismounter, just two-hand it, and just spam the skill. And when enemies get closer, just switch back to power stancing and just spam the skill, or just spam light attacks, whatever you want to do. Now, as for the crystal tiers, I did go with the magic tier to just further enhance the Zamor Ice Storm damage, and I did go with the dexterity tier as well. If you weren't planning on spamming the Zamor Ice Storm skill, then going with the strength tier is going to be perfectly fine instead. But I do recommend just using it at the beginning of the fights, because it is going to instantly proc frost on an enemy, which is going to result in a 20% damage debuff for the next 20 seconds. Now, I did go into about 15 faith just to use Flame Gateway Strength, because it is just going to boost the damage of Stormblade and both weapons when you hit with them directly. Holy damage has gotten a lot better in the Elden Ring DLC, and it is partly because of the Sword of Light and Sword of Darkness. The Sword of Light weapon skill does serve as a body buff that gives you 20% more holy damage for 1 minute, and the Sword of Darkness is going to be a debuff that makes enemies take 20% more holy damage for a minute as well. Now, I would rather just go with a Sword of Light because a body buff is just more reliable, whereas a debuff, you have to individually apply it to every single enemy. Now, you can actually use both together because one is a buff and one is a debuff, but you can only get one per playthrough, so I would just rather go with a Sword of Light in this instance. Now, another thing that has been improved is the Golden Order incantations. Now, we're going to be using the Discus of Light spell, because this one is probably just the best holy spell in the entire game. It is an absolute S tier machine that just goes so incredibly far, does decent damage, can hit enemies twice, can be spammed over and over again, and only consumes 3 FP. Like, this is the most efficient spell in the entire game, and it is not even close. It's going to have a little bit of an intelligence scaling, but it's only at 13. But the reason why this has gotten better is because there is going to be a helmet and a seal that does boost the damage. Now, there already is a helmet and a seal in the base game, in the Radiant Gold Mask and the Golden Order seal. Both of them actually improve it by 10% more damage. But now we have this Circlet of Light, which is another helmet that does boost it by 10%, but it just gives you +1 to Faith, Intelligence, and Arcane, so it's just going to be better. And the Dryleaf seal actually boosts the damage by 15%, which is just more than the Golden Order seal. So you can just put this one in your offhand, and every single time that you use the skill, you're just going to benefit of 15% more damage. Now, the build of which we are going with is going to be a pure faith build using the Coded Sword. The Coded Sword is an incredible weapon. It is a straight sword of which they get an amazing moveset. It is going to be pure holy damage with a pure faith scaling and requirement. So you don't have to worry about split damage. You don't have to worry about speccing into any other stat as well. And the skill Unblockable Blade is amazing. It goes really far. It's really quick. It covers such a wide radius, and it does 35 stance damage. Like, you can spam this thing like just a few times, and it's going to proc a stance break on almost every single enemy and every single boss in the entire game. So being that we are going to be proccing stance breaks quickly, we might as well go with the Blade of Mercy, because every single critical attack that we do get is going to boost the damage by 20% for the next 30 seconds, and that's going to be for all sources. We are also going to have the Shard of Alexander for more skill damage, Sacred Scorpion Charm for more holy damage in general, which is going to make us take more damage, but we can use things like Golden Vow, Blessing of the Erdtree, and potentially heal from afar to just help with the survivability. We are going to have the Phlox Canvas Talisman for just 8% more spell damage. Being that you're speccing into a faith-based build, we might as well utilize all the different damage types. Going up against enemies weaker to fire damage, go with Catch Flame. I like Knight's Lightning Spear as a lightning option. Pest Thread Spears is going to decimate to those larger enemies and enemies weaker to physical. And Scarlet Aeonia should be used on every single faith build. You can proc Rot with this thing instantly at the beginning of the fight, and it will just result in 30% damage over the next 90 seconds. And as for the crystal tiers, we are going to have the Holy tier, obviously, and the Blood-Sucking Cracked tier. This is going to be 20% more damage, but it is going to make us take a bit of damage over time. Now, the health regen could be a problem, but we do have health regen spells to help counteract it. But if it still is a problem to you, you could just go ahead and put on like a damage negation tier or like a stamina regen tier or something like that. I do also have the Letters armor on because for fashion, but it does boost your running attacks and rolling attacks by 10%. And I do have some pieces of the Rakshasa armor because it is going to be 2% more damage for every single piece, although it does make you take a little bit more damage, but once again, it's not that noticeable. But either way, it's still going to be an incredible build. The Deflecting Heart tier is probably the best addition in this entire DLC. It makes every single build just so incredibly powerful, and it makes the entire gameplay experience just really fun as well. Now, a lot of people do say that they'd rather have it be a talisman instead, but no, it's much better being a crystal tier. If it was a talisman, 100% there would be like a negative side effect and a trade-off in terms of like taking more damage or something like that. But as for a crystal tier, not only is there no downside, but it actually does boost your guard counter damage by up to 80%, which is just absurd, and it can make for very broken builds. Because all you got to do is just block at the correct time and you just take like no damage, a lot less stamina damage, and you can counterattack with a complete nuke of a guard counter. And best of all yet, it lasts 5 minutes, which is more than enough time to kill any single boss. Now we're going to pair this tier alongside the Giant Crusher because this weapon right here does actually have the highest guard boost out of all of the weapons in the game at 63, which is actually just as high as like most medium shields. Also does get very high physical and elemental guarded damage negation too, so even if you do miss a deflect, you're not going to be taking much damage at all. And it's a colossal weapon, meaning that it's going to be doing over 40 stance damage with every single guard counter, and it actually is a pretty fast guard counter. The colossal weapon guard counter is faster than colossal swords, curved greatswords, and greatswords. Like these guard counters are literally quicker, and they're doing way more stance damage and way more damage. So this setup can make for an incredible broken combo. Obviously going to have this with a strength-based build. About 60 strength is good enough, which is going to be the minimum requirements to have it one-handed. But when you do two-hand the weapon, getting that 50% boost is just going to make it have roughly like 90 strength. Obviously going to pair it alongside Cragblade for 15% more physical damage and 10% more stance damage for the next 60 seconds. And in terms of the talismans, we're going to have the two-handed sword talisman, which is 15% more damage to all of our attacks except for critical attacks. The Curved Sword Talisman, which is going to be 20% more guard counter damage. And being that we are going to proc stance breaks very quickly, we might as well just throw in the Dagger Talisman for more critical attacks and the Blade of Mercy for 20% more damage after every single critical attack. And this entire build is just going to just destroy everything in the entire game so quickly. And even if you do go up against enemies that cannot be guard countered that easily, you can just use the weapon. And in most cases, the enemies that are very hard to guard counter are going to be very large, of which we are going to be using Pest Thread Spears. This is going to destroy everything. At higher levels, you might as well just spec into a little bit of Faith, use the Claw Mark Seal, benefit of some incantations. This one and Catch Flame being like the only ones you really need. You can use a bunch of other stuff if you wanted to, in terms of like damaging options. We are also going to have Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength, obviously for more damage and damage negation. And we do have Blessings Boon, just for some health regen, because it is going to help offset the health draining mechanic that we do get from the Blood Sucking Cracks tier, because this is going to be 20% more damage, but we will take about 1% health every second for the next 3 minutes. It's not necessary or not required for this build, but it is just going to result in more damage. As well as the Rakshasa armor, you can have this entire set equipped. Every single piece is going to be 2% more damage. But if you did want to have better armor and a better tanky character, you can just go in a different direction. All arcane builds have gotten so much better in this DLC because of the Poisoned Hand, and all blood-based Ashes of War have just gotten better because of the Ansbach set, and we're going to be using both of these things in this build today. Our main option is going to be the Nagakiba, which is probably still the best katana in the entire game. It has incredible reach, does amazing damage, it gets the best moveset with those poking attack heavies. And with certain types of weapon skill pairings like Bloodblade, it can just decimate every single enemy in the entire game. Because yeah, Bloodblade is just going to be like Reduvia skill, but it just can do more damage, more stance damage for half the FP cost, costs less stamina too, have faster blood loss build up, and when you're hitting with it at point blank range, it is just broken. Because the weapon also does get a hitbox, of which the Nagakiba gets really good range, so you actually can stand at a respectable distance and it just melts everything. But as I did talk about in my armor set video, the Ansbach set does boost blood-based skills and dynastic skills, which is going to include the Bloodblade Ash of War. And every single piece does roughly boost it by about 3%. And we are going to have 3 of the pieces on, which is going to result in about 9% more damage. Now for our helmet, we are going to have the White Mask, because with every single bleed proc, it is going to be 10% more damage for the next 20 seconds, and this will work with the Lord of Blood Exaltation too. Now being that we can just spam this skill against every single boss, we can just use a Shard of Alexander, and using it at point blank range is going to help proc the multi-hit talismans, so we do have the Rotten Winged Sword insignia, because even if you're not using the skill, the katanas still swing quick enough to where you can benefit off them anyway. Now being that Bloodblade does scale off the arcane stat and the arcane scaling, we are going to go with an Occult Infusion, which is going to further enhance the blood loss buildup of the the Nagakiba. And being that we do have an arcane build, we can throw in the Dragon Communion Seal and benefit off a whole bunch of incantations and do some really good damage. If you do go up against enemies that are like resist to bleed or like weak to fire damage, you can just go ahead and just spam Catch Flame the entire time. Against large bosses, Pest Threads, once again, this thing destroys everything. And you can use spells like Rotten Breath and Dragon Ice just to proc status effects at the beginning of the fight. You can also use Theodorix's Magma if you wanted to. It is very high damaging, and it actually does work with the Talisman of the Dread. And then obviously Golden Bow and Flame get to be strength for more damage and damage negation. And as for our crystal tiers, we do have the Thorny Cracked tier, which is just more damage on successive hits, which that is going to stack with the Rotten Winged Sword insignia. And we do have the Faith tier, which is going to help us get more damage out of our spells, but it is going to help us meet the minimum requirements of Pest Thread Spears because we do only have 16 Faith, and Pest Thread Spears requires 26 Faith. Now you will also notice that I do have the Poisoned Hand on as well. Every single arcane build is just going to benefit off using this, because this weapon and the skill just procs deadly poison so incredibly fast. All you gotta do is use a skill like once or twice. Every single boss is just procced with poison, and it is going to be deadly poison, so they're gonna take a decent amount of damage over the next 30 seconds. And when you do have this equipped, it is just going to give you 7.5% more damage every single time that you do proc poison. So you're just getting free damage for the next 20 seconds. After you just hit with this thing a couple of times, and then switch back to your Nagakiba and just melt enemies. So yes, alongside the Poisoned Hand, our last talisman slot is going to be the Kindred of Rot Exaltation, which does work the exact same way, but it's going to be 20% damage for every single time we proc poison. And with all these buffs working together, the result is basically what you see on screen right now, everything dying really quickly. Anyway, that's the video now done. Obviously, there's going to be way more than 5 builds that have been benefited off the DLC in terms of all like the different buffs that we have. So I can make another one like this in the future. If you did want to see that, just let me know down in the comments below. I think the next video though will be about the consumables. I still haven't made a video based on those, so I can like rank them or do like a top 10. We'll see what happens. We might have that video up tomorrow. But yes, please do like and subscribe, and do follow me on Twitch because I will be starting to do my level 1 run soon. Probably gonna die a whole bunch, so definitely give me a follow there. Anyway, catch you guys around. Bye.